What if I told you that the person who called 911 to report finding her husband shot and bleeding was the same person who had pulled the trigger just hours earlier? What if I told you that while she cried crocodile tears to paramedics, the murder weapon was already hidden at the bottom of a pond, waiting for her to retrieve it? What if I told you that the perfect Texas beauty queen fooled an entire community, her in-laws, and even seasoned detectives for weeks before one fatal mistake exposed her as a cold-blooded killer? This is exactly the kind of case that will leave you questioning everyone around you. If stories like this send chills down your spine and make you wonder who you can really trust, smash that subscribe button right now and hit the notification bell. We're about to take you inside one of the most shocking betrayals you've ever heard, and I guarantee you'll be glued to your screen until the very last word. Don't let this be the one case that changes how you see the world that you miss. This is the story of Keith and Darlene Gentry. A love story that began with promise, bloomed into what seemed like the perfect American dream, and ended in a betrayal so shocking it left an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about the woman next door. November 2nd, 1974. Darlene Gentry entered the world with what seemed like a golden ticket to life. Born in Central Texas as the middle child of 3 daughters, she possessed that rare combination of beauty and charisma that made people stop and stare. Her blonde hair caught sunlight like spun gold, and her smile could light up any room she entered. But Darlene wasn't just another pretty face. She had substance, ambition, drive. Her classmates didn't just call her the Texas beauty queen because of her looks. They saw something special in her, a spark that suggested she was destined for greatness. She dominated high school, becoming prom queen, joining the flag corps, and somehow managing to be at the center of every important moment without seeming to try. Teachers adored her. Students looked up to her. Family members beamed with pride whenever her name was mentioned. Darlene had that magnetic quality that drew people in and made them want to be part of whatever she was doing. She wasn't just popular, she was beloved. After graduating from Yo High School in Cameron in 1993, Darlene set her sights on Texas State Technical College in Waco. Initially drawn to dental work, she trained as a dental assistant, but her real dream was bigger. She wanted to become a registered nurse, to help people, to make a difference in the world. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, another story was unfolding. Keith Gentry was born September 2nd, 1974, in Waco, the son of Weeman and Glenda Gentry. If Darlene was the sun that everyone orbited around, Keith was the steady earth beneath everyone's feet. Reliable, kind, unassuming. He didn't need to be the center of attention because he was too busy being the person others could count on. Growing up in Robinson with his 2 sisters, Keith embodied everything that small-town Texas values represented. He worked hard, respected his elders, took care of his family, and never complained about doing what needed to be done. At Robinson High School, he wasn't the flashiest guy in the room, but he was the one you'd want by your side when things got tough. Like Darlene, Keith enrolled at Texas State Technical College, pursuing studies in drafting and welding. He had a plan, a vision for his future that involved steady work, a loving family, and the kind of life that his parents had modeled for him. He secured a job as an engineering assistant at a local utility company and seemed well on his way to building the American dream, one careful step at a time. When Keith and Darlene's paths crossed on that college campus, it was like watching 2 puzzle pieces click into place. The attraction was immediate, electric, undeniable. Darlene's vivacious personality perfectly complemented Keith's quiet strength. He grounded her. She brought excitement to his world. Their families watched the romance bloom with knowing smiles, already planning wedding celebrations in their minds. But young love, no matter how intense, doesn't always follow a straight path. By 1997, both had graduated and stood at the threshold of their adult lives. Darlene, her heart full of dreams and expectations, quietly hoped for a ring, a proposal, a next step toward forever. Keith, practical and cautious, wasn't quite ready to make that leap. He loved Darlene deeply, but something inside him whispered not yet. The conversations were painful. The kind of honest, heartbreaking talks that happen when two people love each other but want different things at different times. Finally, they made the devastating decision to part ways. Both families were stunned. Friends couldn't understand how such a perfect couple could simply walk away from each other. Seeking distance and a fresh start, Darlene moved to Dallas. The big city seemed to offer everything Robinson couldn't: excitement, opportunity, anonymity. She returned to dental work and tried to convince herself that this new life was what she had always wanted. But Dallas was harsh, unforgiving. A stolen car incident left her shaken, and the cold, impersonal nature of city life gradually wore down her spirit. After about a year of trying to make it work, Darlene admitted defeat. She packed her belongings and returned home to Central Texas, her tail between her legs, but her heart still hopeful. And fate, it seemed, had been waiting for her return. The reunion with Keith was swift and passionate. All the reasons they had broken up seemed trivial now, overshadowed by the simple, undeniable truth that they belonged together. In 1999, Keith proposed, and this time there was no hesitation, no doubt. They were married in a ceremony that felt like a celebration not just of their love, but of destiny itself. The young couple bought their first home and began building the life they had dreamed about during those painful months apart. Darlene, still driven by her original ambitions, went back to school to pursue her nursing degree. Keith supported her completely, proud to watch his wife chase her dreams with the same determination that had first attracted him to her. By all outward appearances, they were living a fairy tale. But as anyone who has been married knows, even fairy tales require work to maintain their magic. By the early 2000s, Keith and Darlene had settled into what looked like picture-perfect suburban bliss in Robinson, Texas. Their home sat in a quiet neighborhood, coincidentally right next door to Keith's parents, Weeman and Glenda. That proximity would prove to be both a blessing and a complication as their story unfolded. Keith had established himself as a reliable engineering assistant at the local electric utility company, while Darlene had achieved her dream of becoming a registered nurse. Two steady incomes provided them with a comfortable lifestyle, not extravagant, but certainly sufficient for their plans to start a family and build a future together. Those plans began manifesting in 2001 with the birth of their first son, Chase. Cody followed in 2004, and by 2005, they welcomed their third boy, Cade. The Gentry family seemed to transition into parenthood with remarkable ease, supported by doting grandparents on both sides, and embraced by a community that viewed them as the ideal young family. To neighbors and friends, they appeared to have it all. Keith was the devoted father and provider. Darlene, the beautiful, accomplished mother who somehow managed to balance her nursing career with raising three young boys. Their home was always immaculate, their children well-dressed and well-behaved, their marriage seemingly solid as a rock. But beneath that polished surface, cracks were beginning to form. Keith's job, while well-paying, required frequent travel that left Darlene to manage both her career and their household largely on her own. She juggled nursing shifts with childcare, school pickups with grocery shopping, bedtime stories with laundry. Even when Keith was home, he often seemed drained from his travels, more interested in rest than diving into the chaos of family life. Recognizing the strain this was placing on his marriage, Keith made what seemed like a noble sacrifice. He left his higher-paying, travel-heavy position for a lower-paid desk job that would keep him home every night. It was a decision made out of love and genuine concern for his family's well-being. But good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. The reduction in income created immediate financial pressure. Keith found his new job boring and unfulfilling, a far cry from the challenging, dynamic work he had left behind. Frustration began to eat at him as he watched their bank account dwindle while sitting behind a desk that felt more like a prison than a workplace. Meanwhile, Darlene's spending habits hadn't adjusted to their new financial reality. She continued to maintain their home to the same pristine standards, host gatherings for friends and family, and purchase things they could no longer comfortably afford. To Keith's growing frustration, more and more of the daily childcare responsibilities seemed to fall on him and his parents. Arguments became more frequent, usually centering around money and priorities. Keith felt unappreciated and trapped. Darlene felt criticized and unsupported. The easy laughter that had once filled their home grew quieter, replaced by tense conversations and uncomfortable silences. Friends and family members began to notice the change. The couple who had once seemed so perfectly matched now appeared strained, distant. There were whispered concerns, gentle inquiries, but both Keith and Darlene maintained a facade that everything was fine. Neither seemed to want a divorce. They just couldn't seem to find their way back to the happiness they had once shared so effortlessly. November 8th, 2005, began like countless other evenings in the Gentry household. Darlene went out for dinner and drinks with friends, a small pleasure in an increasingly complicated life. She returned home around 8:30 p.m., probably expecting a quiet evening with Keith and the boys. Instead, she walked into a confrontation. Keith had found a restaurant receipt, evidence of yet another expenditure that he viewed as reckless given their tight financial situation. The argument that followed was probably familiar territory for both of them by now, the same frustrations and accusations that had been building for months. According to Darlene's later testimony, she left the house in frustration, driving around to cool off before returning home to apologize and try to smooth things over. Keith went to bed in the master bedroom while she stayed with their 3 sons in another room, ostensibly to help settle their youngest child, who had been fussy that evening. What happened next would shatter multiple families and leave a community reeling with disbelief. At exactly 6:11 a.m. on November 9th, 2005, Darlene's panicked voice reached the 911 dispatcher. The back door of their home was standing wide open. Keith was lying in their bed, covered in blood, barely breathing. Pink foam bubbled from his mouth as he struggled for each breath. Several of Keith's guns were missing from their cabinet. Paramedics arrived to find Keith Gentry clinging to life with a gunshot wound to his head. The pink foam Darlene had described was indeed present, a grim sign of severe trauma that suggested his chances of survival were virtually non-existent. They rushed him to Hillrest Baptist Medical Center in Waco, where he was placed on life support. For 2 agonizing days, the Gentry and Dascasile families maintained vigil at Keith's bedside, praying for a miracle that would never come. On November 11th, 2005, Keith Gentry was pronounced dead, leaving behind 3 young sons and a mystery that would soon consume everyone who had loved him. The homicide investigation began immediately, and detectives quickly focused their attention on the only other adult who had been present in the house that night. Darlene's account of events would become the cornerstone of their case. But as they dug deeper, troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. Darlene told investigators that she had awakened around 5:15 a.m. after hearing their dog bark, but had thought nothing of it since the animal occasionally barked at shadows or small noises. She claimed she didn't discover Keith's condition until around 6 a.m., when she went to wake him for work. But forensic analysis suggested a different timeline entirely. The trajectory of the bullet, the patterns of blood pooling, and Keith's medical condition all pointed to a shooting that had occurred much earlier in the night, possibly hours before Darlene claimed to have found him. More red flags appeared as investigators examined the scene. While Darlene insisted that multiple guns had been stolen from their cabinet during the apparent home invasion, several of the missing weapons were found neatly stacked just outside the back door. This wasn't the behavior of a burglar in a hurry. It looked more like someone had carefully staged the scene to support a particular narrative. Even more suspicious was the fact that only 2 people had access to the gun cabinet, Keith and Darlene. Whoever had opened it knew exactly where it was located and where the key was hidden. A random intruder would have needed impossibly specific knowledge about the home's layout and security measures. Investigators also noted Darlene's behavior during the crisis. As a trained registered nurse, she possessed the skills and presence of mind to administer CPR or at least assess Keith's condition. Instead, she had made no attempt to help her dying husband. When paramedics arrived, she hadn't even left the children's room to guide them to Keith's location, claiming she was afraid for her son's safety. Perhaps most telling of all was the 911 call itself. Rather than the frantic panic one would expect from someone who had just discovered their spouse shot and dying, Darlene's voice was remarkably composed. She provided a detailed timeline of her actions and sleeping arrangements with a clarity that seemed almost rehearsed. The morning of Keith's death, Darlene sat down for a formal interview with detectives. But the moment their questions became more pointed and direct, she abruptly invoked her Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and requested an attorney. The interview ended immediately. Despite this, Darlene continued to maintain her innocence publicly. She spoke tearfully about her love for Keith, acknowledged their financial struggles and the stress of raising 3 young children, but insisted that their problems were ordinary marital challenges that would never lead to violence. Still, suspicion alone wouldn't be enough to build a case. Investigators needed hard, physical evidence that could withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom. With Darlene's consent, they conducted another thorough search of the Gentry home. What they discovered buried deep in the kitchen trash bin would prove to be the breakthrough they needed. Hidden inside a pair of latex gloves was a single .222 caliber shell casing, along with traces of gunshot residue and DNA evidence that pointed to only 2 people, Keith and Darlene Gentry. The discovery was damning, but investigators also uncovered a possible motive that added another layer to their case. Keith had maintained a life insurance policy worth between $500,000 and $750,000. For someone facing serious financial difficulties, it represented a substantial windfall. On November 28, 2005, 19 days after the shooting, Darlene Gentry was arrested and charged with murder. But in a show of loyalty that would later seem tragically misplaced, Keith's own parents posted the $50,000 bond to secure her release. The Gentry family, including Weeman and Glenda, refused to believe that the woman they had welcomed as a daughter could be capable of such a heinous act. To them, she wasn't just Keith's wife, she was the mother of their beloved grandchildren, someone they had trusted and loved for years. Their support was unwavering, even as evidence mounted against her. But then Darlene made a mistake that would ultimately seal her fate. Shortly after her release on bail, Darlene approached Robert Pavavilla, a local landowner and acquaintance, about purchasing a piece of rural property near Axtell, Texas. The land featured a serene pond, and Darlene remarked sentimentally that it reminded her of Keith's dream to take their sons fishing there someday. It was a touching story that might have ended there, except that a few weeks later, Darlene contacted Pavavilla with a strange request. She wanted him to fill in the pond, completely eliminating the water feature that she had supposedly found so meaningful just weeks earlier. The sudden change struck Pavavilla as odd and troubling. Concerned enough to contact authorities, he provided detectives with information that would crack the case wide open. If Darlene was so anxious to have the pond filled, investigators reasoned, perhaps it contained something she desperately wanted to remain hidden. They organized a search of the murky water and quickly discovered what they were looking for: a .222 caliber revolver, the same caliber as the shell casing found in the latex gloves of the Gentry home. They had found the murder weapon, but they still needed to establish a direct connection between the gun and Darlene. Working with Pavavilla, they devised a plan to catch her in the act. Pavavilla called Darlene and informed her that he was preparing to fill the pond as requested, but first needed to drain it completely. Police hoped that if Darlene believed the pond would be emptied, she would attempt to retrieve any remaining evidence before it could be discovered. She took the bait. Over the phone, Darlene remained calm and agreeable, expressing no objection to draining the pond before filling it. But the very next day, under the watchful eyes of hidden surveillance cameras, she arrived at the property wearing wading boots and carrying a long rod. The cameras captured everything as she stepped into the water and began probing the pond bed, searching frantically at the exact spot where investigators had already retrieved the murder weapon. It was the final piece of evidence prosecutors needed to build an airtight case. In February 2007, 32-year-old Darlene Gentry faced trial in McLennan County, Texas, charged with first-degree murder in the death of her husband. The trial lasted 5 days, during which the prosecution methodically presented their case centered around that devastating surveillance footage. The image of Darlene in the pond, desperately searching for a murder weapon that had already been seized, destroyed any remaining credibility her defense might have had. Combined with the latex gloves containing the shell casing, the staged burglary scene, the conflicting timeline, and the substantial life insurance policy, the evidence painted a clear picture of premeditated murder. Her defense team chose not to call any witnesses during the guilt-innocence phase of the trial, relying instead on cross-examinations and procedural arguments. But the mountain of physical evidence was simply too overwhelming to overcome. On February 8, 2007, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Darlene Gentry was sentenced to 60 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 30 years. The prosecution had successfully argued that her motive was both emotional and financial. She wanted out of her marriage, wanted freedom from the financial pressures and domestic responsibilities that had been weighing her down, and wanted the security that Keith's life insurance payout would provide. The beautiful young woman who had once been called the Texas Beauty Queen, who had seemed destined for a life of happiness and success, would spend the rest of her prime years behind bars. Darlene is currently serving her sentence at the Dr. Lane Murray unit in Gatesville, Texas. In November 2017, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied her request for a new trial, ensuring that her conviction remains final. According to official records, she will be eligible for parole in February 2037. If parole is denied, she will serve her full sentence until February 2067. Throughout her imprisonment, Darlene has maintained her innocence, but the consequences of that November morning have extended far beyond her prison cell. In 2010, a judge granted permanent custody of Chase, Cody, and Kate to Keith's parents. A restraining order was issued prohibiting Darlene from having any contact with her sons. According to court documents, she has not spoken to them since her conviction. The three boys who had once been at the center of her world are now being raised by the same grandparents who had once supported her so loyally. Keith Gentry was remembered as a man of quiet strength and unwavering integrity. He was a devoted father who chose family over ambition, stability over status, love over personal gain. His decision to take a lower-paying job to be home with his family, while it may have contributed to their financial stress, demonstrated the depth of his commitment to being present for his wife and children. He left behind 3 young sons who will grow up with only photographs and stories to connect them to their father. He left behind grieving parents who not only lost a beloved son, but also had to grapple with the horrifying realization that they had been deceived by someone they had trusted completely. Most tragically, he left behind a legacy tainted by the very person who should have been his greatest protector and advocate. Keith's memory will forever be intertwined with the story of his murder, overshadowing the quiet heroism of his daily life as a husband and father. The case of Keith and Darlene Gentry serves as a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with dramatic flourishes. Sometimes it wears a beautiful face, speaks in a soft voice, and sleeps beside you for years before striking. Sometimes the greatest danger comes not from the stranger in the shadows, but from the person who knows exactly where you're most vulnerable. For the residents of Robinson, Texas, the Gentry case shattered their sense of security and trust. If someone like Darlene, beloved by so many, respected by her community, and trusted by Keith's own family, could be capable of such calculated evil, then how could anyone ever feel truly safe? The 3 Gentry boys continue to grow up under the loving care of their paternal grandparents, protected from their mother's reach, but forever marked by her actions. They will never know their father except through the stories others tell them, and they will carry the burden of their mother's crime for the rest of their lives. As for Darlene, she sits in her prison cell, maintaining her innocence while the years slip away. Whether she truly believes in her own lies or simply refuses to confront the magnitude of what she has done, only she knows. But the surveillance footage doesn't lie, the physical evidence doesn't lie, and the jury's verdict speaks for itself. In the end, this is a story about the ultimate betrayal of trust, the destruction of innocence, and the devastating consequences of choices made in moments of desperation or selfishness. It's a reminder that the capacity for evil exists in places we least expect it, and that sometimes the person sleeping next to us is the one we should fear most. The surveillance footage of Darlene desperately searching that pond for a murder weapon that was already in police custody will haunt you long after this video ends. It's the moment that proves sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one who kisses you goodnight. If this case left you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust and betrayal, you need to subscribe to Dark Trail Files right now. We uncover the most shocking true crime cases where the killer is hiding in plain sight, and I promise you, every single story will leave you speechless. Hit that subscribe button, because once you go down this rabbit hole with us, there's no going back. This is Dark Trail Files, where the truth is always darker than you think.